Chapter 22. Farewell, my loves. There was a moment of silence as minds full of hope and doubt tried to process everything that was happening and everything expected to happen. Tensions were at maximum and hearts were on the verge of breaking. The only thing keeping anyone going was an aim and a tiny flicker of hope. Emily turned to face Rolf and the turkey men, who were slightly further away than her immediate party of 5, now counting the spirit of their deceased general. She walked closer to Rolf and stopped about 10 feet away. Emily looked back to her party for a moment, then faced Rolf to speak to him. "Captain Luger." Rolf smirked, putting up his left hand in the stop gesture. "Please, miss, it's just Rolf now." Emily nodded and responded, "Okay then, Rolf. Can you let Colonel Rouge know that we have successfully reached our destination?" Rolf shook his head no, with pursed lips, saying, "Absolutely not." Emily responded, slightly confused. "Pardon?" Rolf answered, clarifying his intent. "No, miss, I just can't do that. In fact, none of us can. If there's any chance that you might be able to make it back from this, then we'll wait here for you. Then we can report together." Emily tilted her head slightly left while looking downward and answered in a soft but serious tone, "When this is done, when my body returns to this world, it will be without my spirit. You will have a corpse." Rolf answered with folded arms, "Yeah, maybe, and maybe not. Supposing once you crossed over the threshold, if you found some way to do the same thing without dying, you would do that instead." Rolf looked over to James and spoke a bit more loudly. "Ain't that right, James?" James answered in a half stammer, yes. There must be some way to come back, even without your same body. Right?" Emily gave a nod, understanding their intent, and at first looked to James, and then to Rolf, and then the others as she spoke. "If there is a way to come back after, I will." James looked to Emily with a speck of hope in his soul, asking, "You promise?" Emily looked to James and answered softly, "Yes, I promise." Rolf nodded enthusiastically and then spoke in the same manner. "All right, it's settled then. We'll be right here. We'll be waiting." Emily kept her subtle smile and spoke in an even cadence. "The journey will take 3 days. I will emerge at the same point I left." Emily looked to Connor, Sin, Haleen, and Mikhail, saying, "We ready?" Connor answered, "We are." Sin answered, "We've got your back the whole way." Haleen spoke to Emily through telepathy. "We stand with the girl with golden wings, as spoken of in the visions." Mikhail answered, "We're with you, kid. You can do this." Jerky Turkey spoke from a distance behind Rolf. "Hey, I know we're some weird bird guys who just randomly showed up, but we know you can do this. The Mad Doctor destroyed our home and our species. We're behind you all the way on this one." Lurky also spoke. "We'll be rooting for you." Emily smiled and nervously chuckled silently, overwhelmed by the support she was receiving, and spoke with hope and stoicism. "Thank you, all of you." Emily then turned to James, moved close, and spoke to him softly. "And thank you most of all. None of this would have been possible without you." James nodded yes, with folded arms, holding back his own building sense of loss and sadness. Emily moved close to him, leaned close, put a soft kiss onto his right cheek, then wrapped her arms around him in an embrace. James unfolded his arms and wrapped his around Emily. When he did, the floodgate of tears started, but he kept his composure, allowing the tears to flow without making any sound or quivering as one suffering extreme sadness. Mikhail looked to the setting sun and spoke softly, "Emily, it is time." Emily's face became more stoic as she stepped back from James. She turned to face her 4 guides and spoke, "You 4 are to take to the tops of the 4 pillars. I remain on the altar." 4 of the surrounding plateaus were taller than the others and had stairs wrapping up around them. Each was meant for one of the 4 guides. Only at the altar of sacrifice could one change destiny with the help of 4 pillars of support. Sin went to the southeast, Haleen to the southwest, Connor to the northeast, and Michael to the northwest, filling the 4 cardinal directions. Emily would remain at the epicenter to be guided by the 4 pillars. With the 4 guides situated upon the 4 pillars, Emily was ready to make her plea to the universe. James, Rolf, Lurky, and Jerky stood some distance away, giving Emily the room needed to perform the necessary ritual. Emily knelt down on both knees upon the still wet with blood altar. Kneeling, she raised her hands into the air and looked to the setting sun. She began to speak in the language of angels as she appealed to the universe. She spoke as though making an incantation, with great emphasis on clear pronunciation and powerful speech. The forest echoed with Emily's resolve. The others looked to each other, unable to understand what was being said. James alone could comprehend Emily's speech. James looked to the others and said, "I can translate," and began relaying each phrase back to the others in common speak. When he did this, each person heard the words in their own original native tongue, not in their ears, but in their hearts. Emily's plea echoed throughout the great forest of spirit, Nebraham, saying, "O great Omninium, strong and fertile Father, Mother, hearken to one who has shed blood. Behold, one prostrate, humble before an infinite universe. Give ear to the daughter of Yeshua. Suffer me this one thing. Bestow upon me the power of truth. May the shackles of madness be broken. I implore, O great Brahman, Jehovah, Allah, Tao, Marduk, Anana, Shiva, Vishnu, Lucifer, Mary, Odin, Buddha, and to all names of God under every sun. Grant me this day, this one thing. I make but one humble request under every name. Grant me this. I offer my blood. May the blood of sacrifice wash away all ire. I offer my heart from my very chest. May my heart, still in youth, given willingly for others, grant to all a return. May the years that have been devoured by the locust be restored. I trade all my promises. I trade all my vows. I trade all my aims. I trade all my life and all my love. Restore to life all loves lost to the madness. I give my blood for peace. I give my heart for restoration. Immaculate Omninium, grant me the way." Upon Emily finishing her great incantation, the sky was rolled back. Every star, every moon, every celestial body vanished from sight. The ground trembled. From the far end of the altar of blood appeared a deep purple portal swirling with universes. A great velvet light poured out from the portal, calling upon her to enter and take the journey. The visage of every concept of God, and of every concept forgotten or not yet conceived, flashed through the portal in infinite combinations. A voice of all voices poured out, but only to Emily and the 4 guides, as everyone else who heard passed into unconsciousness, joining in the great non-duality, yielding also their strength to answering Emily's imploration. Emily stood, looking straight ahead to the portal. It called out to her, pulling her as it would the light to a person recently crossed over, or a moth to a flame. The call was undeniable, the earnest imploration complete, the blood shed, and the heart ready. Emily took 12 resolute and helpless steps forward. She looked back to James, who now lay unconscious on the ground. Turning back to the portal, she took the 13th step and vanished through the aperture. She passed through the gate of madness, created by a corrupted form of God, the mad construct of the mad doctor. She slipped into the void, and the sky returned to its previous state. The 4 guides vanished with her as she crossed over into the Omninium. The light vanished, and the aperture faded away. The others slowly roused back to consciousness. Everyone started to sit up, looking to where the portal and the four guides had been. So did everyone else on every world, everywhere. For that brief moment, the entire universe came to a halt and became God to grant Emily's earnest imploration, paid for with the blood of God, celestials, and man. Lying sideways with folded legs, holding himself up on one hand, looking up to the now empty altar, Jerky questioned out loud, "You think she can really do it? Fix everything?" James looked at Jerky as he sat up, leaning back on his hands, and answered, "Of course she can. She's the daughter of God." Rolf chuckled out loud, looking at James, raising his left hand for a high fist bump, saying, "Dude, you got with God's daughter." James didn't return the gesture, only staring back aghast with a face of shock and fright. Lurky stared at Rolf with a look of disdain. "Kinda crude, don't you think?" Rolf shook his head no, with an almost smug but actually acquiescent attitude, and said, "Nah, I'm sure he understands. You know that everyone is God, right?" Jerky exclaimed. "Huh?" Rolf answered, "Well, I've been thinking. Someone like God would be totally infinite. There wouldn't be anywhere it wouldn't be, or anything that wasn't part of it. So, in a way, one could say we're all aspects of that, right?" Lurky nodded and answered, "Sure, that sounds deep, but how would one explain something like that?" Rolf thought for a moment. "Well, if you take all the colors and mix them together, you just get a murky mess. Each color is its own dimension. So I think, in a way, you could say something like, maybe..." Rolf paused for a moment to think, while the others patiently listened. Then some words came to him. Okay, I got it. God would be every aspect, but it separates itself to see its different facets. Sin would be God's sensuality and playfulness. Connor is God's dark side, his suffering. I'm one of God's military arms, his warrior spirit. You turkeys would be God's sense of humor, disguising two brave souls as birds, ritually eaten on holidays on my world. James, you're the conscientious objector, heart and soul of fairness. And Emily, James spoke, the dutiful daughter, obedient even to death, but with a heart bigger than most planets." Rolf nodded. "Yeah. Yes. James looked to Rolf, Jerky, and Lurky and asked, "Will you all wait with me, just for 3 days?" Rolf answered, "Of course, man. We're not leaving you alone. There's plenty of water here, and I've got some rations." On the other side of the rift, Emily emerged into a place of complete directionlessness. There was no light, no darkness, no separation of anything. She could barely have a thought. She knew to move in a direction, but had no idea where to go. There was only the vastness of infinite void. Here, she had no body and no memories. She had only her instinct to guide her. Suddenly, she felt a great plummet, as though falling. A panic built up inside of her as she felt herself fall. A gentle voice called out from the void, "You are not falling. You are just going in a new direction." Hearing this brought Emily to a place of comfort. Next, she found herself upon a plane of perception. The infinite void took on directionality. The 4 carnal directions became spiritual directions. All at once, Emily felt a pull from 4 poles. Sensing that they were somehow important, she gave herself away and allowed herself to drift in the direction of the strongest pull. Having recently been in battle and walking away from her lover, the closest pole was suffering. Emily drifted through the infinite void, allowing herself to be pulled to the strongest pole. Before her stood the essence of Connor Greenleaf, clad in black and wearing instruments of war. He stood in a vast graveyard under thundering skies, dark clouds, and a dead sun. The essence of Connor Greenleaf spoke thoughts into her consciousness. The visage said, "Abandoned by father and mother, without family or meaning, I am ageless, as is my suffering. I looked for love, but found only hate. I retreat to lonely places. I sleep away the vast majority of time, for it is too difficult to bear. There is no joy, no happiness, no pleasure. There is only the endless night. An infinite lifetime of suffering awaits. All hope is gone. Emily felt this to be true within her soul, but it felt incomplete. She felt the darkness of this aspect attempting to consume her, but she wanted something else. She felt a great desire, and so started to drift to another pole, leaving the aspect of suffering behind for now. She again drifted across the endless void. Feeling a desire, she became attached to it. She started to drift towards the pole of desire. Before her appeared the essence of sin, clad in sultry clothes, surrounded by bodies writhing in pleasure. All manner of vice, from drink to drug, was being consumed by those in the endless orgy of pleasure around her. The essence of Sin Kai spoke in near squeaks, as though constantly orgasming. The essence of Sin Kai spoke to Emily's body, giving her form and sex, saying, "So much pleasure. Ecstasy. I must have it. I want to feel joy. I want to feel love. I want sex. I need it so deeply and completely. I must have pleasure. Nothing else matters. I want to feel so good. You can feel good with me. Come to me. Experience pleasures as you never have. Bring your boy. We can all play together. We can all come together. Please. Please." Emily felt arousal and sensual pleasure. She felt compelled to walk into the orgy and take part. A part of her could stay there forever. Eternal ecstasy seemed like such a desirable thing, but something else was pulling at her spirit. It was not within her nature to seek only pleasure. Even through a life permeated by suffering, and with a desire to seek pleasure, she knew there was more, and then she felt a new pull. Torn between the two poles, and drifting between both for some time, the necessity for something more arose from within. She contemplated her nature, looking for answers to this question of suffering or pleasure. What is the nature of life? Is it grounded in existential suffering, or is it to seek pleasure? This arose not as a conscious thought, but as a conflicted nature. Feeling this, Emily drifted across the endless void toward a new pole. Soaring across infinite emotion and desire, seeking her true nature, she drifted towards the essence of Haleen, residing within the pole of impermanence. Haleen was a unicorn at first. She then transformed into a toad. The toad became a drop of water. The drop of water ignited into flame. The flame turned into a stone. The stone dissipated and became vapor as air washed over it. Emily looked on, trying to comprehend what was happening. The essence of Haleen communicated with Emily's being, granting her a Tao. Emily looked inside to see what it was. She implored upon the truth of all existence to find herself, but found only an infinite universe. Emily's spirit cried out, "Show me the truth!" Emily beheld the entirety of the universe and all possible universes everywhere. She saw all manner of creature, every construct, every thought, every feeling, every perception. It all coalesced into an infinite primordial soup of non-duality, the great nothing of which everything subsists, neither existing nor not existing, neither manifesting nor failing to manifest. She saw a great nothing, and the nothing spoke. The essence of Haleen spoke, booming out, "The universe is." Emily's spirit cried out, "I don't understand." The essence of Haleen spoke again, booming with the intensity of every voice ever, "You are." Again, Emily's spirit yearned to attain this knowledge, crying out, "I don't understand. Show me." The essence of Haleen now spoke more softly, saying, "Child, look inside." Emily turned her spiritual gaze inward. Inside, she saw an endless string of light, adorned with glowing orbs, like an infinite necklace of pearls. She saw that she was one of those pearls, in an endless line, forming an endless spiral in every direction and no direction at all. Inside the first pearl, she saw Emily Weiser. She followed the string to the next pearl. Inside she found Rosa Parks. She followed the string again. Inside the next pearl, she found Joan of Arc. She followed the string again, and inside the next pearl, she found Siddhartha Gautama. Following the string to the next pearl, inside she found Yeshua. She took a long leap backward and looked inside a pearl several hundred down the line. She saw a brave and stoic male elven warrior, Ian Goldrose, wielder of the sword of Worldsbane. Moving much further along again, she became every animal. She became every cell. She became every molecule. She became every quark. She became everyone who ever lived, everyone alive, and everyone who ever will live. Seeing herself as every form, the impermanence of each form dawned upon her consciousness. The separateness of each form led to individual thought. In doing this, Emily gained mind. Now with yearning, nature, and mind, she knew her form was still incomplete. There was something else that must interact with those aspects. Now with a mind to think thoughts, she wondered what that last pole might be. She also remembered that there was a mission. She could not recall what it was, but nonetheless knew that one must exist. Seeing this final answer, Emily drifted away from existential non-duality to become a separate entity. She drifted again across endless void, heading straight for the pole of judgment. Far off in the distance, she saw the shining gold essence of Mikhail Joseph Smith. Also knowing that they were the same person, Emily drifted toward the essence of Mikhail at the pole of judgment. The essence of Mikhail stood among endless graphs, books, signs, maps, scrolls, stone tablets, computers, telephones, and all manner of things which can be used to convey or store information. The presence of the essence of judgment brought order to Emily's thoughts, allowing her to choose an aim. The essence of Mikhail spoke to Emily with clarity and distinction. Potential is infinite, but a life is not. From an infinity of things, one must choose a certain few. The choices are based upon an aim. Even the direction of a mindless flow came from an initial choice not to choose. This is judgment. We use our judgment to accomplish an aim, accepting some things and rejecting others. The act of judgment has utility, but can also be used as a weapon. When judgment is applied to the self and the judgment can be improved. However, when judgment is applied to the other, it has the effect of tearing down. Our ethic is our judge, and by whatever means we judge another, by that measure we shall also face judgment. Knowing this and choosing carefully are the way to an aim. Using your judgment, you can determine what desire to chase and what desire to detach from. You know this based on your nature. Emily drifted away from the fourth pole, crossing the endless void to the point where she first originated. With a solid feel for the four spiritual directions, she could now determine her direction, know her desire, choose to pursue or detach, and from there move in the direction of an aim with wise judgment. With directionality now determined, Emily was ready to ascend. However, before that could happen, she would have to navigate the next trial by enlightenment. This event was the first day. Back in the forest of spirit, Nebraham, Rolf, Lurky, and Jerky made camp near the oasis, well within view of the altar of blood. They put together a small circle of stones and built a fire to keep warm at night and took turns keeping watch. With nights that last 18 hours, it was easy to have one person awake for a few hours at a time, and everyone could still get more than 8 hours of rest. James took the first watch, followed by Rolf, then Lurky, and then Jerky. At some point during his watch, Jerky accidentally fell asleep. He awoke to see an amazing sight. Jerky was slumped up against the tree, sleeping lightly, when he stirred and popped one eye open to see that the party was not alone. Surrounding the entire area were all sorts of fey creatures, pixies, sprites, nymphs, fairies, satyrs, and many others. They had all gathered around this area and were simply there, most of them with bowed heads and closed eyes. Those with open eyes kept their gaze fixed on the altar where the portal had been. Despite being sick, diseased, and malnourished, they had all showed up to offer their support for Emily's journey. Jerky called out to the others quietly at first. Um, guys. Seeing that no one stirred, Jerky accidentally overcompensated and yelled out, "Guys!" Both Rolf and Lurky bolted awake, ready for anything, only to see Jerky pointing to somewhere off in the distance. It was early in the morning, and the morning sun in their eyes cast a crowd around them as the shadows against the morning horizon. Rolf mumbled, half awake with one eye open, staring into the sun. "What the hell? Who are they?" Lurky seconded that, saying, "Whoa, who are those people?" Jerky could see a bit more clearly with his cybernetic vision and answered, "All kinds of mythical looking creatures. They all seem to be resting or praying, maybe?" Lurky spoke softly, looking out at the hazy forms. "Well, gotta figure. If they live here and want their forest returned to how it was, they must want the girl to succeed. Wouldn't that follow?" Rolf nodded. "Yeah, I think it would." Having been up most of the night, James was still fast asleep. In the spirit world, Emily began the second day of her journey. Having arrived at the epicenter of the four poles, Emily was ready for the next phase of her journey. Having seen and come to terms with suffering, desire, impermanence, and judgment, Emily was ready to confront their origins. A question resonated from all around and inside, asking, "How has this come to be? What is the source?" Emily pondered where the process could have started. She mused to herself, thinking, did it start with suffering? Is that why one would seek pleasure? Or does one seek pleasure because one suffers? Could it be the attaching to things impermanent is causing the suffering? Perhaps it is in judging a thing to be desirable, or not, that causes the attachment. There was not a clear answer, yet one seemed to be demanded. Emily would have no choice but to take her best guess. Considering her own life, she chose suffering as the origin of the cycle. She moved towards that pole to give her answer. However, when she arrived, the answer did not fit. In the form of suffering, the essence of Connor spoke, saying, "No, I suffered because I was attached to pleasures I could not have. So I attempted to eliminate my desires. In the end, I only desired to stop desire, and the suffering continued. This is not the origin." Emily quickly found herself back at the starting point, having rediscovered the four poles all over again. It didn't delay the process any, as time did not exist in this place, but it was extremely tedious having to relive the entire process. Starting again, Emily chose a different answer, thinking, it must be the attachment to pleasure making life feel bad. It must be desire that started the process. Emily floated across the endless void to the pole of desire, again encountering the essence of sin, who said, "So you believe the origin of suffering to be the desire for pleasure. Yet when pleasure is mine, I forget my suffering. Sadly, the pleasure always comes to an end. Nothing is permanent." Emily was again sent back to the starting point, and was starting to become frustrated. She had to again reorient to the four poles and choose another answer. Starting to become entangled in a web of thoughts, thinking became murky and slow. It was getting more difficult to focus, and she became more agitated with each passing moment, especially being reacquainted with the poles again. Overthinking the entire process, Emily concluded that perhaps judgment may be to blame for the whole process. She moved towards the pole, desperately hoping for it to be the answer. Emily floated across endless void to the essence of Mikhail, who said, "When I don't think about things, the results of my actions often cause suffering. Yet when I think about things, that also causes me to suffer. It is then I realize that I have forgotten that everything is impermanent. I am constantly judging things that don't ultimately matter, and then judging myself for not thinking about them. When I judge well, I suffer less, but when I don't judge at all, I don't suffer. But I also experience no pleasure. But this too shall pass. I'm afraid the origin is not to be found here. Something started all this judgment." Emily became infuriated, as for a third time she was sent back to the center of the poles, to be reacquainted with them yet again. Her mind was clouded, her emotions ran high, and her suffering increased exponentially. She desired to be free from the suffering, and also forgot that it was not permanent. Her sorrow and frustration multiplied with each passing moment. Seeing no other choice, she made her way to the pole of her nature, her Tao, Helene. Upon floating across the void to Helene, Emily found herself confronted with her nature, which upon her arrival spoke to her, saying, "At long last, you come around to yourself. Why are you looking at me? You made yourself the way you are. What else could you have made yourself? One can no more change their nature than a knife can cut itself. You are what you are. Why are you judging it? Can you truly blame yourself for what you've become when you had no other choice? I'm afraid this is not the source of your troubles." Emily became paralyzed with desire, suffering, and judgment, and wished any kind of pleasure might take her away from this personal self-made hell. She became completely entangled in the trap, unable to escape the web of thoughts. An eternity seemed to pass, trapped in this hellish state of being wrong, being unable to be right, having no right way to be, and trying to change an unchangeable nature, desiring change, suffering, and judging. Emily started to drown in a despair-saturated sinkhole of her own making. With no answer to cling on to, she dove deeper into the waters, looking for ground upon which to stand. She dove deeper and deeper, getting in more and more frustrated and panicked. After what seemed like an eternity of effort, it finally occurred to her that perhaps she should not try. She became still. A thought arose, but she paid no mind to it, judging nothing. A desire arose, but she didn't attach to it, resolving that it would be okay if the desire were not fulfilled. She also did not desire to end the suffering. She simply accepted that it was. In doing so, and not trying, she succeeded in changing her nature by not trying to change it. In this, she accepted impermanence. She neither manifested, nor did she fail to manifest an answer, because she let go of the question. As soon as she did this, she started to ascend out of the murky deep. She passed the poles, leaving them all behind, ready for the last leg of her spiritual journey. This event happened during the second day. Back in the forest of spirit, Abraham. By the dawn of the second day, not only had native fae folk of all kind gathered around, so had all types of animals native to the forest. Rabbits, mice, raccoons, deer, elk, wolves, bobcats, and all manner of animal had gathered around the area. Somehow they all put aside their appetites to gather in harmony, waiting at the altar, in solidarity and hope. This increased the hopes of Rolf, James, Lurky, and Jerky as they patiently waited for Emily to return. They filled most of the time with card games and small talk. Underneath all that, despite the support, they hoped for the best, but feared the worst. Still, they held out for some hope. In the spirit realm, Emily moved past the questions, answers, and mental constructs. Free from the web of thoughts, she was able to move into the realm of manifestation. In this realm, she would face the infinite possibilities of potential. In this realm, Emily found herself standing in front of a grand set of scales. Resting upon the right side of the scale was a feather. A being clad in judge's robes and a blindfold sat behind the scale. His expression was stern, but not contemptuous. The judge boomed out in an all-encompassing voice, "What is it that you seek? Why is it that you have come to the realm of spirit before your appointed time?" Emily called out to the judge, "I wish to free the prisoners from the mad construct of judgment." The judge queried, with voice booming, "Do you speak of this?" Emily went into a vision. There she saw all manner of psychic creatures, kept prisoner in a massive machine, built and operated by the mad doctor. The minds of the psychic creatures were being used to amplify the fears, regrets, and judgmental proclivities of anyone exposed to their manipulated energies. The energies were broadcast through a monolithic tower, rising far above all other structures. The signal went into cell phones, televisions, newspapers, religious text, history books, church sermons, and all the other forms of media. Rather than being mediums of personal or honest expression, They had all been transformed by the mad construct's power into implements of lies, judgment, and murder. The mad doctor cackled with delight at his control over the minds of others, his narcissistic joy amplifying every bit of the duplicitous energy being channeled to divide and destroy. Upon the end of the vision, Emily answered, "Yes, I wish to free them. I wish to free them all from the mad construct." The judge spoke more softly, but still boomed out like 1,000 cannons. "I see. However, I must determine if this is just. Justice, girl, it must be tempered with compassion. This feather bears the weight of righteousness. If you can offer me something that weighs more than this feather, I will indeed grant your request. What have you to offer for this?" Emily answered with conviction, "I offer my blood, freely shed upon the altar of sacrifice. I offer my blood, given in suffering towards a just cause, given in the spirit of love." Emily's shed blood began to pour down upon the scale on the right. In almost no time, the weight of the feather was displaced by the weight of her blood. With the feather raised up high, the blood continued to pour down, soaking the feet of the judge. The judge nodded, satisfied, saying, "Surely this is an overpayment. However, it cannot be undone. The purchase has been made. Behold, the captives are freed." Emily went again into the vision, seeing all the creatures able to rise above their constraints, ascending into places of joy and peace. All at once, the signals going out to the mediums were stopped, and the gears of the mad construct ground to a halt. The machine began to collapse upon itself, freeing all from the grips of its divisive intent. The cold chambers were emptied. The lights of the mad construct went dull, as the windows no longer shone forth the rays of judgment. The minds inside the machine were routed, and left the thoughts of those formerly bound to them. The foreign mind of the mad construct was removed from power, as the machinations of the mad doctor melted down. Only the mad doctor and his vile tower remained, emptied and powerless. The judge proclaimed, "It is finished. The prisoners are free." Emily called out, "The mad construct may be finished, but I am not." The judge looked down to Emily, confused, saying, "What are you saying? What is it that you would demand, in addition to this thing you have already done?" Emily called out, "I wish to make an offer for every life lost to the madness of the construct. I want them brought back into this world. They deserve to live, even if it's temporary. They were robbed of their lives, and I wish to restore their lives to them." The judge took on an even more sobering visage, saying, "What you ask is no small thing. Even your blood is not sufficient for that." Emily thought well, considering all things. The pleas of others who wished her to return safely resonated within her mind. She wished for some way to restore the lives and not completely abandon the ones she cared about. She knew how heartbroken they would be made by the loss of her life with them. Emily considered all things very deeply before making an offer. A most dreadful idea occurred to her, the horror of which sounded like sufficient payment for such a monumental ask. Emily considered her answer well, thinking about both the lives she wished to save and the ones she might leave behind. Emily felt the answer in her soul, and spoke with conviction. "I offer my nirvana." The judge sat up, taken aback by such an offer, knowing full well what it would imply. The judge took on an expression both morbid and curious, saying, "Do you know what you are saying? If you do this, you can never experience the bliss of heaven. You will never feel your Father's embrace. You will never know your mother's love. You would reincarnate for all eternity, never escaping the wheel of time. You would give up your liberation to save a few billion mortal lives?" Emily answered passionately, without hesitation, "Yes, I freely offer that." The judge was shocked, even offering up the tiniest hint of a smile. A solitary tear streamed down his left cheek. Being most moved, the judge spoke to Emily in a kind and soft way. Throughout all of eternity, many have attempted to bargain with me, mostly for selfish and petty desires. You alone have moved me to compassion. It is written, he who would keep his life shall lose it, and he who would lose his life shall keep it. Emily answered, Yes. The judge continued to speak. For such a thing, although what you offer is great, I have yet one more requirement to make of you, if you truly wish for this. Emily asked earnestly, What would you ask? The judge replied, The saving of any amount of lives requires the loss of at least one life. To honor your request, I would take the life from your body and return you to the material world as a corpse. However, since you would have to reincarnate for all eternity, I would offer you the choice of bodies to inhabit. Emily nodded, understanding fully, and answered, Then I choose the life inside of me. I have known a man, and I am pregnant with his child. I would choose that form, so that I am not separate from him. If I cannot be his lover, I will be his daughter. Either way, I know he would love me. I could not bear to be parted from him. I love him too much. The judge fell silent for what felt like an eternity. After the great pause, the judge offered up his response to Emily's offer. The judge spoke with compassion and clarity. Even if you do this, things may not turn out as you expect. Are you certain of this decision? Emily answered, It is all I can offer. I am certain. The judge became rigid again, despite being so emotionally moved, saying, Your request is granted. I part you from your body. Go, inhabit the child, and live. A being of pure light walked over to Emily. It pointed to the silver cord attached to her. The being produced a pair of golden scissors. The being moved as though full of remorse. Extending the scissors, it cut the cord, severing Emily from her mortal body. Emily fell out of space and time. She experienced every memory of every lifetime all at once. She felt not only every experience she had ever had, she also felt every experience from the perspective of all those she had ever interacted with. There was no judgment in this. It was all experienced in pure love. With the cord cut, Marduk, Anana, Yeshua, and her Earth Mother appeared before her. They all embraced her, bringing her comfort and love. Emily wanted to stay forever, but knew that she couldn't. Facing this, she took a step back, smiled at them, and then descended to the planet below to reincarnate. Every memory faded, and Emily became a new person as she entered her new incarnation. This experience was the third day. In the forest of spirit, Nebraham. By the dawn of the third day, all manner of celestial creature had gathered around the altar of sacrifice. Seraphites, angels, and even good-natured devils had gathered around to show support for the young girl who had passed through the portal 2 days prior. It seemed that everyone wanted to be liberated from the mad construct, as its reach had gone far beyond a single world. The entire universe seemed to be its prisoner. All manner of being meditated, prayed, cast magic, sang songs, played instruments, and did whatever seemed right to them in support of the golden-winged daughter of God. As the dusk of the third day approached, everyone waited with a great sense of anticipation, most especially James, who barely slept for the entire time. The supportive masses waited in great anticipation and hope as dusk approached. As the sun began to sink towards the horizon, the portal reopened above the altar of sacrifice. Everyone gasped upon seeing this happen, wondering what could come of these events. James, who was sitting with his back against a tree, nearly jumped to his feet as the portal appeared. He took several hurried steps toward the altar, not looking where he was stepping, tripping over a nearby root and falling onto his face. Looking up, he saw the blood on the altar rise up into the portal. The portal changed from purple to a brilliant white after all the blood poured in. A moment later, in a flash of light, Emily and her four guides re-emerged. Connor, Sin, and Helene and Mikhail reappeared on the four plateaus around the altar. Emily's body reappeared on the altar and fell limply to the floor. A flash of light engulfed the entirety of the universe as all the prisoners of the mad construct were set free and granted eternal love in paradise. However, people were primarily concerned with whether or not Emily was still alive. Everyone had risen to the reappearance of Emily and her guides, but it was James who went running to the altar. Connor, Sin, Helene, and Mikhail all moved quickly to catch up. James rushed to Emily to see if she was alive. He arrived to discover her pale and motionless, similar to when he had first seen her in the freezer. James became panic-stricken and turned her over onto her back. Her eyes were staring lifelessly towards the darkening sky. James got down and leaned over to perform CPR, not even noticing her very swollen belly. The party and everyone else watched on in anxiety as James performed chest compressions and put breaths into Emily's lungs to save her. Connor approached with his supernatural vision, seeing no signs whatsoever of life within the pale body. Rolf called out, quietly at first, "James." James could not hear over his own emotions and continued to administer CPR to Emily's lifeless body. Sin gasped, "Oh no," putting her hands over her mouth. Rolf called out the louder, "James! She's gone." James heard this but ignored it, hoping against hopelessness to revive the object of his love. Rolf moved over to James and scooped him up and away, holding into him with his arms wrapped around his chest. While no one else had been looking, the golden soul of Mikhail Joseph Smith dissipated into the aether, being done with its purpose. James held out, "Let go of me, asshole! Let go!" Connor stepped up between James and Emily as Rolf pulled James back, speaking forcefully, "Be silent." James fell quiet, but if looks could kill, Connor would have combusted right then and there. Connor stooped down to attend to Emily. Stooped down, he looked up to the party and said, "There was a heartbeat." James answered in confusion, saying, "What?" Connor placed his left hand on the body known as Emily and spoke with a hint of hope. "It's not Emily's, but there is a heartbeat." Sin mused out loud. "Any pregnant creature in the forest gives birth within 3 days. That means—" James became more calm, but was also stunned, as his observations finally caught up to the moment, allowing him to see that Emily's body was the equivalent of 9 months pregnant. His entire demeanor changed from pain and rage to shock as it dawned upon him that the life inside Emily was his. James fell onto his knees, placing his right hand over the swollen tummy. James looked up, seeming shocked and again panicked, asking, What do we do?" Connor answered calmly, "Emily cannot give birth. The child must be removed or it will die." Jerky stammered, "Removed?" Lurky answered, "Surgery." James looked to Connor, still in awe, asking, "Can you do it?" Connor answered, "I can. However, a real doctor would be preferable." Rolf looked at James and said, "You know what to do." James nodded yes and leaned down to Emily, gently closing her eyes. He scooped Emily's body back up into his arms and took off in a flash. Slowly, one by one, the various creatures started to leave the area. The rest of the party stood there for a bit, with James and Emily now headed back to the camp. The events of the last few days seemed to have left them mostly speechless. Sin broke the silence by asking, "Does this mean we go home now?" Rolf looked to Sin and answered softly, "There's little to be done now. So, yeah, I suppose so." Connor spoke, "I want to see the child. I can teleport us back to the camp via the waypoint I have set." Sin backed the idea, saying, "Let's go." Rolf, Sin, Lurky, and Jerky gathered around Connor Greenleaf to be teleported back to the camp. Helene approached the party as they were about to leave. Connor saw this and directed the party to notice, through a subtle nod of his head in the direction of the young-looking unicorn. Helene spoke to the party, again through telepathy, speaking directly to each mind. Thanks to your efforts, our forest is now free. In time, both the land and its denizens will recover. We will be granted a full measure of health. All thanks to you. Connor turned to Helene and answered, We are Matic. That is what we live for. Be well. Connor took a bow, a gesture which the others saw and performed as well. Helene also gave a mutual bow of respect and gratitude. With the niceties out of the way, Connor swiftly activated the teleport spell to go back to camp. James had already arrived at the camp, which was being slowly disassembled and moved to the newly discovered castle. Arriving in a cloud of dust, James looked about, only to find that the doctor's tent was no longer there. James yelled out, I need a doctor! Some people paused their activities, but the urgency of James's call was not fully heard. Seeing that the sense of urgency was not received, James called out all the louder. James bellowed at the top of his lungs, We need a fucking doctor! A young man had been nearby, stacking some crates onto a makeshift wagon. He dropped his current load and turned to face James, shouting back, The doctor's tent has been moved to the castle courtyard. James gave a nod, still holding Emily's lifeless body in his arms, and zipped away towards the castle. Upon approaching the castle and crossing the gate threshold, James quickly found a tent marked with a red cross against a white background. It had been quickly fabricated out of a white bedsheet and red paint. Wasting no time, James made a mad dash for the doctor's tent, albeit at ordinary speeds. James burst through the tent flap, barging in on a cozy dinner being shared between Dr. Katz and his husband, David. The two looked up from their meal, startled by such a sudden arrival. Dr. Katz looked up from his meal to see James holding Emily's pale and lifeless body. Dr. Katz let out a subtle sigh and spoke to David. I'm sorry, darling. Seems an emergency has cancelled our dinner. I'll see you later tonight. David replied in a tone both understanding and seductive, saying, You bet your sweet ass you will. Be good. David got up and exited the tent, leaving his husband to perform his medical miracles. Dr. Cass gestured to James to place Emily on a nearby table. James moved swiftly to the table and set Emily down onto her back with the utmost gentleness. Dr. Katz inquired in a serious tone, What's happened? Isn't that the strange girl? James answered, holding back his emotions as best as he could, choking up slightly. Emily is dead, but she's also pregnant. Dr. Katz moved quickly to start examining Emily, looking for any signs of life. Barely a moment later, Stanley and Ellen Weiser rushed into the tent. Ellen Weiser had been a victim of the mad construct, and so her life had been restored by Emily's sacrifice. James was shocked to see this, but everyone else was blissfully unaware. James looked up, enraged to see Stanley Weiser there, appearing to look concerned. James bellowed out, You! Stanley stammered, Is she going to be all right? James shouted, nearly screaming as Emma looked on in relative confusion. Why are you here acting like you give a shit? I thought you disowned her. Or was that an act too? Stanley shouted back at James. No dipshit kid is going to knock up my daughter and then tell me I can't see her. Dr. Katz asserted himself, shouting over all of them. I can't work in this chaos. Shut the fuck up and back off. All of you. While everyone else in the tent did just as the doctor demanded, he started to perform a manual examination of Emily's body. James called out to the doctor, Use your equipment. Without looking up, Dr. Katz retorted, None of that stuff works here. James shouted back, Emily defeated the mad construct. The equipment should work now. Dr. Katz was full of doubt, but could not deny that his medical equipment would be helpful, so he went to fetch his scanner, muttering, I'd better not be wasting my time. Dr. Katz picked up the medical scanner and activated it to find that James was correct. Without interference from the mad construct, Matic devices now functioned properly again. The doctor quickly got to work, determining a prognosis so he could administer treatment. Astonished, the doctor commented out loud, Every cell in her body has undergone full necrosis, but there's life inside her. Dr. Katz looked up, being both mortified by Emily's death and feeling hope for the child within, saying, The fetus seems to be fully developed. I think I can save it. James nodded in approval, as he was the only living parent. Seeing that James approved of the action, Dr. Katz got to work straight away. Performing at the peak of his ability, Dr. Katz spoke as he began surgery. "I need you all to leave. I'll come let you know when it's done." James, Stanley, and Ellen respectfully left the doctor to perform his task. Dr. Katz worked quickly and precisely, wasting not a moment with the full intention of saving the little life inside Emily's body. Using his equipment to determine the exact location of the fetus, Dr. Katz planned an incision whereby to reach inside the womb and safely remove the little life. The doctor prepared his instrument and worked to free the little life from the womb as soon as possible. Outside the tent, the drama continued. Ellen looked to her husband, confused, asking with a tone of desperation, "What's going on here? You told me she was dead and buried. And why is she pregnant?" Stanley answered with a tone of resentment. "She was dead to all of us when she whored herself out to that dipshit kid." Ellen reacted in utter disgust. "You're calling our daughter a whore? She would never do such a thing." Stanley answered back, "The slut and her spawn can rot for all I care. I'll be at home if you need me." James became enraged and sprinted over to Stanley without warning, punching him square in the face. Stanley was knocked straight down onto his ass with a broken nose. Stanley arose to his feet shakily, cursing and ready to fight. "I'll fucking kill you, boy." Nearby security personnel saw the skirmish and immediately intervened to break it up. James backed off, but Stanley was even more livid, still attempting to get to James. The security staff escorted Stanley away from the area to sit in the newfound castle dungeon, which could now be used as a brig. During the scuffle, Stanley's cell phone dropped out of his pants pocket and onto the sand. Horrified by everything taking place, Emma saw the phone and picked it up and put it into her own pants pocket. Ellen turned to James, looking teary-eyed, and asked, "Is any of that true?" James collected himself and answered softly, "Miss Weiser, Emily and I had a very brief but very beautiful relationship. We were in love. She's not a—" Ellen answered, choking back her own feelings. "I understand, but what's come over my husband? None of this makes any sense." James opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Ellen saw this and spoke gently to James. "The men tell me that you protected Emily a bunch of times, back on the sphere ships. I'll get to the bottom of this myself. Stay here and wait with me for your child, my grandchild. 'Kay?" James nodded, saying, "Yes, ma'am." Suddenly, the sound of an infant crying could be heard from within the tent. James and Ellen looked at each other in amazement. Still, they patiently waited for the doctor to give them the okay. A few moments later, the tent flap opened and the doctor emerged. With a smile on his face and a tear, Dr. Katz spoke in a somewhat broken voice. I wasn't able to save Emily, but the child lives. She was suffocating and I had to revive her, but she's okay. You can come and see her if you like." James and Emma looked at the other and went into the tent to meet the baby. Inside, wrapped up in a bedsheet on the operating table, was the new life. Unbeknownst to them, Emily now inhabited this new body with a fresh start. The doctor carefully scooped up the little child and handed her to James, who took great care to hold her properly as he received her. In James's arms was a beautiful little blonde-haired, blue-eyed, freckled baby girl. She was crying when the doctor handed her to James, but went quiet as soon as he was holding her. Standing next to James, who was awe-stricken, Ellen looked down to her granddaughter, speaking softly. "She's beautiful. She looks like both of you." James managed to utter, "Yes, she is." Dr. Katz spoke softly to the two, admiring the new child. "She had suffocated. My only option was to use one of the 2-in-1 shots, the kind that both fully heal and prevent a month's worth of aging. She won't grow for the first month, but she seems to be healthy and should be able to live a full life." James stammered, adoring his child and feeling so connected to her. "Thank you, Doctor. You did an amazing job." Out of the corner of his eyes, James could see the outline of Emily's body under a sheet. Dr. Katz spoke softly with sorrow. I'm sorry I couldn't save Emily. James answered softly. She gave her life, willingly, for all of us. Ellen turned her gaze from the child to James to ask him, What are you going to name her? James smiled through a tear-filled face, answering, Emma, because she's a gift from Emily. Dr. Katz spoke as the two admired little Emma, saying, We'll have to find some way to feed her, but with the equipment working again, we should be able to synthesize some formula. Unless, of course, we can find a lactating woman willing to help. I think Mrs. Tafferty is expected to have a child very soon, a little boy. She may be able to help with that. Suddenly, all conversation was drowned out by the sound of a jet engine passing overhead. Some distance away, a Matic vessel touched down. Emma was not at all disturbed by the loud sound, resting quietly with eyes closed in her father's arms. James overheard a conversation occurring outside. A man was reporting to the colonel. Ma'am. Colonel Rouge answered. Report, mister. The warrant officer replied. We failed, ma'am. The entire squadron was destroyed. We couldn't penetrate their defense grid, and the broadcast tower still stands. I barely escaped with no shields or weapons and just one engine. I'm sorry. Colonel Rouge answered with a somber tone. I expect a full written report. Dismissed. James walked outside, still holding Emma, with Ellen not far behind. At the same time, Rolf, Connor, and Sin were drawing close to the tent, having come to see if the baby could be saved. The turkey men preferred to stay away from the human camp, fearing they might not be accepted, or worse, be seen as food. Seeing James holding a little person wrapped in a sheet, Sin beamed with relief and joy, and went running over to the party to see the new person. Sin, seeing Emma's cute face, blurted out, Aw, she's beautiful. James nodded, still holding her, saying, Her name is Emma. Rolf spoke quietly. You done good, kid. That's a handsome little girl. Connor commented, She has the face of her mother. Even Colonel Rouge was able to pull herself away from the dire news for a moment to admire the new child, the first human born on Tarathar. Sin dared to ask, looking at James, What about... Ellen burst into tears, finally realizing that Emily was really dead. Sin put her hands over her mouth to keep herself from crying or screaming. Dr. Katz confirmed the sad news. I did everything I could. I'm sorry for your loss. Discreetly, Rolf made his way over to Colonel Rouge. Standing close to her, he spoke quietly enough to only be heard by her. Did the strike team do it? Did they destroy the broadcasting tower? Colonel Rouge shook her head no, saying, No, they failed. Emily has only delayed the inevitable. Sin heard this and spoke with some anger. What do you mean, delayed the inevitable? Colonel Rouge answered softly but seriously. The tower still stands. So long as the tower and the physical man remain. Rolf finished the thought. Everything will just start all over again. All because we can't penetrate the damn defense grid. Connor asked, What would it take to penetrate the grid? Colonel Rouge answered, According to our science guys, about 1 billion megajoules of energy, or an object moving at the speed of light, and we don't have access to either of those. At that very moment, something occurred to James. He knew what he had to do. Speaking not a word, he started to hand Emma over to Ellen. Ellen took the child carefully, asking, James, you okay? James looked to Ellen as everyone else looked on and said, I can do it. I'll need a ship. Colonel Rouge asked, James, what are you thinking? James answered, I don't have time to explain. I have no doubt that the mad doctor will send a counterforce to snuff us all out. I have to stop him. James looked to Ellen, saying, Will you take care of her for me? Ellen answered, Of course, but you're coming back, right? Right? James answered softly, I don't know. Sin exclaimed in some confusion, James, what are you thinking? James looked to everyone and spoke with some conviction. I want more than anything to stay here and take care of Emma, but that would be selfish. If I don't do this, we're all fucked. Rawl protested. What? You gonna throw your life away and abandon your daughter? On a theory? James replied softly. Sorry, I gotta do this. Rolf went to intercept James as he turned to the direction of the nearby Matic vessel. Connor put his right hand on Rolf's left shoulder, saying, Let him go. It's his decision to make. James sprinted to the vessel and stopped next to it, turning back to face the others, all looking sorrowful and confused. James called out, Miss Weiser, I know you'll love her right. Rolf, Sin, Connor, Dr. Katz, and everyone else around looked on as James prepared to leave, knowing that a success or failure could change all their fortunes. They wanted to live, but didn't want to make another sacrifice. Reality, however, simply made that impossible. James called out one last time before turning to leave. I love all you guys. After my parents died, you all took me in and took good care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of all of you, the only way I can. Take care of my little girl. James took a running head start and hopped up into the cockpit of the battle-torn vessel, landing directly in the pilot's seat. Before closing the cockpit window, he called out, Don't worry, folks. This will only take 20 minutes. Look for a big flash in the night sky. That's how you'll know you're safe. And tell Emma her father loved her way more than anything. Goodbye. James closed the cockpit window while simultaneously activating the vessel's systems. It had minimal life support, no weapons and no defensive systems. It had just enough engine left to get off the planet, perfect for the one-way trip he was planning. James activated the engines, setting them to full power at an upward velocity. People gave the vessel plenty of room to operate as it kicked up massive amounts of sands and dust. The vessel shakily took off, slowly ascending into the night sky. It was a clear, cloudless night with both moons out of view. The stars shone brightly, with no light pollution at all in the vast desert. The hot glow of the Matic vessel's solitary engine slowly faded from view as the vessel left the planet. With the vessel and James out of view, Colonel Rouge made her way briskly to the medical tent. Dr. Katz and others followed her, wondering what could be so urgent at this point. Once they were all inside the tent, Colonel Rouge started rifling through the doctor's things. Dr. Katz spoke in confusion, asking, Ma'am, can I help you? Colonel Rouge replied with urgency, I was told that you have a radio in here. The doctor answered, I do, in the chest, next to the bandages. Colonel Rouge wasted no time digging through the various items to get at the radio. Separating it from the other items, she picked it up and took it outside, setting it down onto the ground. Kneeling down and in front of it, on the sand in her dress uniform, Colonel Rouge activated the radio and attenuated it to the frequency of the Matic vessels. Having set the radio, Colonel Rouge attempted to contact James in the vessel he had taken, saying, James, this is Colonel Rouge. Do you read me? There was some static, but no answer. Colonel Rouge made another attempt. James, do you read? What the hell are you doing out there? Sin grabbed the radio receiver away from the colonel, speaking with sadness and desperation. James, talk to us. What the hell are you doing out there? You're too cute to die yet. Fucking talk to us. There was another silence, followed by a response. I'm gonna take out the tower and destroy everyone in it, without hurting the planet, so that your planet can live, so that all of you get a shot at life. Colonel Rouge let Sin hold the receiver, but talked to James herself. How you gonna do that with one engine and no weapons? What's going on in that genius little brain of yours? James responded, Simple. I'll use my chronometric powers to accelerate myself and the ship to light speed. Colonel Rouge protested, James, that's impossible. Even you can't move that fast. James responded again, though not answering the question directly. I'm reading an entire flotilla out there. Thousands. I have to set my course precisely so I don't hit one of them instead. Colonel Rouge became agitated and scared, asking, How are you going to hit light speed? Answer the damn question. James paused a moment as he went about setting the flight path and coordinates, then answered, Simple. I'm going to use the nanites in my body to amplify my powers. Sin objected, shouting, "What? Your nanites can't be that strong." James chuckled lightly and responded, "They aren't on their own. But if I connect them to energy directly from the ship's power core, that'll be more than enough." Sin inquired with worry, saying, "How are you going to do that?" James answered again via the radio, "Simple, through direct contact with the power conduits." Colonel Rouge exclaimed, "James, that'll emulate every cell in your body. You'll evaporate." James answered, "Yep, just a few seconds after hitting light speed." "Hell of a way to go, isn't it?" Sin exclaimed, "That's insane, dude." James spoke on the radio one more time. "Take good care of Emma. This'll all be over soon. Love you all. Over and out." After that, the radio went silent. Everyone looked at each other in almost mutual disbelief. It was almost too much to process. Connor interrupted their gazing to each other, saying, "I believe we're meant to be looking at the sky." There was total silence as gazes turned to the skies above Tarathar. Seemed like everyone was holding their breath. They waited in hope and terror as all eyes looked west. In the cockpit of the vessel, James was making final adjustments to his heading. Satisfied that the course was properly set, James reached to the nearby toolkit to get something to open a nearby access panel with. He dug out a screwdriver-like tool and used it to pop the bolts out of a nearby panel. Once it popped loose, James carefully removed the cover. Inside was a glowing power conduit attached directly to the vessel's drive systems. Any amount of contact with that would be deadly. James reaffirmed the course, set it, and engaged the solitary engine at maximum output. With the course set and engine powered up, there was only one thing left to do. James took several deep breaths, knowing they would be his last. Trusting the settings in the equipment, he closed his eyes, and to himself softly uttered the words, "Emily, I'm coming." Having uttered that statement, and with everything ready, James put his right hand on the metal of the vessel's interior. He activated his chronometric power to affect time, also wrapping the vessel in the field, speeding it up as well. Closing his eyes, he reached out with his left hand and grabbed onto the live power conduit, sending thousands of volts and amps through his body. Unimaginable pain coursed through James's body, along with thousands of amps, energizing the durable nanites and immolating his human flesh. Although James had turned off the radio, the flow of energy reactivated it, sending a signal to those waiting on the planet. By now, hundreds had gathered around, but those close to the radio heard James' final wailing scream as every cell in his body became immolated by the thousands of amps flowing through his body. Faces recoiled in shock and terror to hear James's last terrifying scream in shock and horror. Sin dropped the radio receiver on the ground, putting her hands to her mouth as a tear streamed out of each eye. A moment later, after all the horrified gasp, there was total silence. About a second later, a series of brilliant flashes showed up in the western night sky. 22 white flashes of white light could be seen as though it were a distant exploding star. Immediately after the flashes of light, Emma started to cry. Ellen did her best to console the crying child, her new granddaughter. The Mad Doctor and the vile broadcasting tower were annihilated by the mere shockwaves of the remains of the vessel hitting the planet at Silicion's atmosphere at light speed. The defensive grid and the planet remained intact, but the power was destroyed and the Mad Doctor killed, with very little collateral damage around the site. James had been successful. The Mad Doctor was dead, and his reign of control and terror were over, returning the minds of all affected, liberating all the rabble slaves. Aboard every hostile vessel, mutinies erupted as the rabble came back to their senses, retaking their lives. The rabbles' efforts were bloody and violent, but successful as they earned back their stolen freedoms. Gloria Singer, restored to life by Emily's sacrifice, was standing next to Colonel Rouge, looking very confused, and asked, "I don't know where we are, and I can't find Mikhail. Where is he?" Colonel Rouge tried to answer, saying, He, he's... Sin removed her hands from her mouth and answered shakily, He gave his life for us. He's gone. Connor added, Emily and James have done the same. They gave everything, that we might live. Confused and sad, Gloria started to cry. Still on her knees, Colonel Rouge looked to the sky and mused out loud. Have we become the sort of generation that sacrifices our own children just to spare our own hides? What have we become that the young should perish and the old linger on? Connor went to his daughter and knelt down next to her, taking her under his arm to console her. She leaned into his embrace and let herself cry. Connor spoke, taciturn but full of emotion. What is the cost of saving the world? Lately, it seems to be everything. Rolf walked over to Amber Rouge, who also seemed very upset, and extended his left hand out to her. She took his hand in hers and helped her to her feet. Having no other to turn to, she leaned onto Rolf for comfort. He stayed stoic, saying nothing, but wrapped a single arm around her. Dr. Katz spoke with profound wonder, moved by it all, saying, Wow, horrific miracles and beautiful tragedies. Dr. Katz's husband came out to find him and took him into his arms, moved by the wonder and terror of the whole thing. Victory had been achieved, but it was so bittersweet. There was little for most to do but console each other. Colonel Rouge rose to the moment. Leaning away from Rolf, she put a hand on the center of his chest, gave him a nod, and then moved to address the people as their leader. The colonel turned to Dr. Katz, saying, Doctor, I need a loudspeaker. The doctor stepped away from his husband, grateful for the support, and went into the tent to get the amplifier. He returned a moment later and helped Colonel Rouge connect the device. Once the device was set up, she was ready to speak to the people. Before addressing the people, Colonel Rouge turned to Rolf and said, Captain, can you get me the journal? Rolf answered, Yeah, I'll be back quickly. Rolf ran off to the general's tent to retrieve Mikhail's last writings. The spot remained under guard and unmoved since the general's death. Thankfully, the electric buggies now worked properly, and Rolf could get there quickly. People remained outside even late into the night, and their clamoring started to become loud and confused. Jonas Black had been among the crowd, but on his own. Seeing Gloria Singer's sadness and confusion, he followed his instincts and moved in right away to help her in whatever capacity he could as a counselor. There was much to catch her up on since the destruction of the spheres, and with the loss of her partner in nearly 400 years, she would be in great need of some support. As Rolf returned to the Mikhail's journal, 144,000 people stood under the star-filled desert sky, wanting answers and direction. Colonel Rouge would do her best to give them that. She took up the loudspeaker device and the journal and prepared to do just that. A pair of rather bulky gentlemen brought over a 5-foot-tall crate for Colonel Rouge to stand on and helped her to get to the top of it with the loudspeaker device. Once she was up there, she addressed her people. Colonel Rouge spoke with compassion and conviction as she addressed the restless people. People of the Matic Corps, those who have traveled with us, friends and family, and those caught up in the great swell that led us here. Everyone stopped what they were doing and gave their ears to Colonel Amber Rouge, to whom they would turn for leadership and advice. A sea of people were gathered round her to hear the colonel's inspired words. They remained silent and listened very intently. Colonel Rouge continued to speak. As we stand under a starry sky of a new world, we realize how far we have journeyed and how much we have lost. No amount of freedom or victory will bring our lost friends and family back to us. In addition to all the people not here tonight, people who left back on Earth, people who died shortly after we arrived, those who have died defending our camp from predators, those who willingly laid down their lives for us, cannot return. They chose to give everything for us. Just in these last few days, 3 more beautiful souls have sacrificed everything to bring us freedom and preserve our lives. A young lady named Emily May Weiser. She confronted the mad construct of our worst enemy. She succeeded in freeing countless souls from the maddening effects of the mad construct that tore our world apart. She also brought back those lost to the madness of the times. She did this at the cost of her own life. A young man by the name of James Everett Battalion. He was behind the series of explosions in the sky. His sacrifices destroyed the tower and brought an end to the life of our greatest enemy, whose name we shall not even utter. James chose to end the Mad Doctor's reign of terror and lost his life in doing so. He leaves behind an infant daughter with no parents. The child, Emma, has been entrusted to the capable hands of Ellen Weiser, her grandmother. But she won't have to do this alone. Ellen, we will all be with you. Also, our great general, Mikhail Joseph Smith, took his own life, which was necessary for becoming one of Emily's 4 guides, enabling her to finish her journey to confront the vile forces of madness. Certainly, his leadership and wisdom cannot be replaced. He also will be sorely missed. Because of these great sacrifices, we have all been preserved. These and many more went willingly to their deaths in hopes that we might live. And live we shall. But before we get into any of that, General Smith has left us one final gift. He left behind his journal, which he insisted not to be revealed until after our plan had succeeded. Although he took his own life just to save our skins, General Mikhail Joseph Smith has left us his parting words. I will read now, directly from the General's journal. Keeping her own feelings in check while choking up some, Colonel Rouge prepared to read the General's final writing. However, before she could start, she was interrupted by Gloria Singer. Hearing the Colonel's words, Gloria excused herself from Jonas and called out, "Stop!" Putting the mic to the side, Colonel Rouge turned her attention to Gloria, saying, "Excuse me?" Gloria ran and performed an acrobatic flip, landing on top of the crate next to Colonel Rouge. Standing there in her Matic uniform, also with her customary makeup, Gloria leaned close to Colonel Rouge, whispered some inaudible words. Colonel Rouge nodded along, understanding, and handed the journal over to Gloria Singer. Colonel Rouge held the mic up to Gloria so that she could hold the journal open and read it at the same time. Gloria Esteban Singer started to read from the journal with slightly trembling hands, while Colonel Rouge respectfully held the microphone for her. She read aloud. By the time this is being read, most likely by the lovely Gloria Singer, or the fiery and compassionate Amber Rouge, I will have passed from this world. By now, a young girl named Emily Weiser has given her life so that others may live. This would not have been possible without the taking of my own life. So I have taken my life, knowing full well the benefits and the consequences. Emily Weiser, Sin Kai, Connor Greenleaf, James Battalion, and myself, we all experienced a shared vision. Something like what you might call God shared itself with us. It showed us a different path, one that would set right so much of the hurt, the brokenness, the despair of living in a time of war. I weighed my decision very carefully before proceeding, and discovered that the success of our mission would exact a toll. Part of that price to be paid would be the giving of my life. By now, many of you will find yourselves standing under an alien sky, wondering what could possibly be coming next. If, through our collective efforts, we have succeeded in our task, then that decision of what to do next will be up to you. We've sailed across the ocean of space and discovered a new land. Having arrived, there is now no way back. We did this willingly for our people. Gloria was tearing up as she read the manual, but wiped her eyes with her sleeves and kept on reading, as she knew the penmanship, and this was truly the man's last writings. She continued, "Without a doubt, many sacrifices will have been made. Many of you may be feeling confused, empty, bitter, or just hopeless. But remember, we all knew what it meant when we swore that oath. We of the Matic Corps believe that your ethic is your judge. We, having carefully considered all possible alternatives, hold these 8 sacred ethics in perfect juxtaposition with each other and within each other. We are many, united as one. The line between good and evil does not run between countries, skin colors, genders, or even ideologies or religions. The line between good and evil runs down the center of the human heart. At the end of this day, we either decided to love or we didn't, but we often forget that each man does what seems right to him. Even the act of violence, that pain, that tragedy, is an act of love. Even the hurts can be used to mold us into loving each other. At the core of our ethic is to reduce suffering, and though I generally loathe violence, I can also see the beauty in it, the passion, the love, the conviction. I can see the beauty in our suffering, in our losses, in our longings. But most of all, I have come to see the beauty in all of you. I saw something wonderful and special in all of you, or you would not be here today, as a part of this wonderful cause, a cause committed to loving and liberating all. Our attainment and our karma will never be perfect, but if done out of love, is the most wonderful thing imaginable. Please, do take the time to mourn the fallen. Take time to appreciate the silence left by a loved one's absence. Use that time to remember them. With our world liberated from the constructs of madness, let us now take the time to love and appreciate one another, who now remain. I wish I could say that I have envisioned this since I was a child, but the truth is, I have not yet had a childhood, or at least I have no recollection of one. If my understanding of the shared vision is correct, I have not yet been born. I am just an idea. It puzzles me that I can exist without an origin, but, as it turns out, some things do not need a cause, only a pattern. My instinct tells me that in a few generations I'll be born as a human for the first time. I will grow into the man I was. I will again die, and then be reborn. It is the most noble of souls who choose to give up their nirvana to reincarnate endlessly. The Dalai Lama is one such soul. It is done with the intention of delaying one's own comfort to comfort others. This has always been the model behind the Matic Corps. I am not saying that I am as great as the Dalai Lama, but wouldn't that be a fantastic aim? Additionally, I have learned that time is cyclical. Sometimes the event precedes the cause. Future events on this world will shape our past, even if we should be unaware of them. You hold in your hands not only the present moment, but also the future and the past. They are all connected, and for us, they are all one. Without now, yesterday cannot be seen, and without a future to look forward to, we cannot conceive of a context for the present moment. Now, here you are, in the present moment, remembering the past and designing the future. I do not know if the Corps will go on without me, but I think the spirit of it will. I see in you the potential for a great people, forged by adversity, tempered by failure, and motivated towards compassion. The future is yours, for you have fought, and many of us have died for it. You get to choose love, hate, peace, war, acceptance, or strife. It's all up to you. I have faith in every single one of you, that you can embrace not only the vision of a great future, but also a great present moment. I ask only that you do what you do out of love, as I have tried to do. I hope I was successful. I love all of you. Be well, my beautiful family. Mikhail Joseph Smith. The crowd remained silent, taking in all the words spoken. Mikhail's writing seemed to leave them all in a state of awe. Not a single person was speaking, and not even one baby was crying. There was no wind, no clamoring, nothing, just silence as people marveled at the final words. Gloria started lowering the book, and after a long pause, began speaking from her own heart. I am Gloria Esteban, singer. Most of you knew me as the General's personal assistant, but our relationship went far beyond that. General Mikhail shared with me his thoughts, his soul, and his bed. I was his wife. We never let anyone know, in order to maintain the appearance of being professional and unbiased. I spent nearly every moment either with him or doing something to help him. His vision was extraordinary. Despite being a military man, he always liked to imagine a world where the Matic Core would be unnecessary, but that wasn't what the world gave him. We always used to joke about running away and starting an intergalactic marijuana dispensary. He liked to watch old black and white soap operas with me. He enjoyed reading and working with wood. He didn't care for philosophy, not because of the ideas, but because of how people use the ideas in it to try to force others into their ideas of acceptable. Though he led the greatest war machine conceived on Earth, he was at heart a man of peace. I think that what Mikhail would want is for all of us to try to be happy here, make the most of what we've been given and what we've fought for. He was a man of conviction and passion, but in the end, he just wanted us to be safe and happy. And I think if we pull together, comfort one another, and try to help each other succeed, I think if we do those things, that vision will have been realized. It's all up to us now. Godspeed. Having finished speaking, Gloria stopped speaking, took the journal for herself, and stepped back, yielding the speech back to Colonel Rouge. The moment was far too profound for words or applause. Colonel Rouge said nothing, but instead bowed her head, closed her eyes, and observed a minute of silence. Everyone else did this too, taking this moment to remember the fallen, honor the brave, and thank those who suffered. Not in words, but in their hearts. After the mutual moment of silence, Colonel Rouge spoke once more to the crowd. Picking up the mic again, Colonel Rouge spoke with a slight waver in her voice, as one very humbled, and said, "Tomorrow, there will be funeral services for Emily Weiser, James Battalion, and Mikhail Smith. The notice board in the courtyard will display the time and location. This gathering is now concluded. Good night." Colonel Amber Rouge and Gloria Singer stepped down from the crate, leaving the crowd to slowly dissipate on its own. Some went home, while others stayed around to socialize. Rolf was among the crowd's first few rows. He was thinking about getting back to his daughter once all the services had been attended, when his attention was pulled to the presence of his best friend, Jack Holton, who had been killed during the assault on the spheres in space. Jack stood there, confused, looking at Rolf, and asked, "Hey, boss, what's going on?" "Last thing I remember." Rolf turned to Jack to speak to him, revealing that half of his flesh was missing from his face. Jack reacted in shock. "Holy shit, boss! What happened to your face?" Rolf answered ponderously with a slight smile. "Oh, that. Bad day at work. Left me with a bit of a scar, but, you got rescued. Things are okay now? You should grab some beer, yeah?" Jack nodded his head. Rolf was looking across the crowd, happy that he was back, but saw Jacob Bastian wandering around aimlessly. Rolf looked to Jack and said, "Hang on a sec." Rolf called out across the crowd, "Yo, Jacob!" Jacob heard this and jogged his way over to Rolf and Jack. Upon arriving, Jacob uttered, somewhat alarmed, "What the fuck is going on, man? I woke up on a slab in a makeshift morgue." Rolf answered, "Well, you must have died and got resurrected, but you're here now, so no sense worrying about it." Jonas Black now approached the group as well, shouting out, "Jacob, Jack, it's great to see you guys." Rolf chuckled. "Alive, even. Ha!" Jack looked at Jonas and said, "I think we're about to hunt down some drinks and kick back a bit. You in?" Jonas answered, looking at Rolf, "Well, I'd like to, but I guess it depends on whether or not I'm really welcome." Rolf thought for a moment, making a very serious face, then answered, "Well, you are a bastard, and I still do owe you one, so let me do that, and then we're square. All right?" Jonas answered unenthusiastically, "I guess." Rolf looked at Jonas and said, "Okay, close your eyes." Jonas retorted, "What?" Rolf insisted, sounding angry. Just do it, man. Jonas shook his head, answering in an exasperated way. Fine, just get it over with. Jonas closed his eyes and waited to be punched. Rolf extended his left index finger out and just barely touched the tip of Jonas's nose and spoke in a high-pitched voice, saying, Boop! Jack and Jacob laughed at this as Jonas opened his eyes to find Rolf chuckling away over his own joke. Jonas let out a sigh after another short pause and then chuckled some to himself. The other three left Jonas behind at first, but he caught up to them in a mere moment. Along the way, Jack queried, So, do we got any beer or what? Oh, Jack queried, So, do we got any beer or what? Jonas answered, I heard some of the tech boys figured out a way to make liquor from some of the cacti. Should be interesting. Jack exclaimed, Shit, after all this, if it's liquor, I'm down for it. So the quartet of confused men went off to find some liquor and forget the day. Connor and Sin spent some time together, telling each other stories about their separate lives, getting to know each other all the better. As for the others, some went home and enjoyed the company of loved ones. Some danced, some socialized, and others went off to be by themselves. There was no itinerary for the night, and so each did as they thought was best for them, and allowed the others to do the same. In the spirit world, with his body obliterated, James arrived on the other side. He floated in a place of darkness, with a great light ahead in the distance. Feeling compelled, he moved toward that light. Going toward the light, James felt infinite love and acceptance that was both masculine and feminine and wholly accepting. James experienced a life review, seeing not only the events of his own life, but also seeing them from the perspective of those he had encountered. There was no judgment in it, except for the judgment James placed upon himself. However, as James looked up from the point of view of Emily, he also saw her as an infant, looking up to him. This made him very confused, and he started to ponder the meaning of it. Communication in the spirit world was done through telepathy, so as soon as James pondered the question, the answer came to him in the form of some instant thought. As soon as he thought the question, James thought, How is this possible? The answer came from the light. She chose to return. You named her Emma. James became confused and frightened, thinking, Where's Emily? Again the light answered, She is not here. She has chosen to give up her nirvana in exchange for eternal reincarnation. It was the terms of our covenant, in exchange for the lives of those swept away by madness. Next, James saw his parents, arrayed in splendid glory. He also saw his grandparents and many others who had crossed over. They welcomed him with warm love and acceptance. It felt so wonderful, unlike anything else, but James' thoughts remained with Emily. James thought to himself, Why? Why must we be separated? The light answered, She made her decision out of selfless love. You also did this. James thought, I thought she would be here, but I've left her behind. The light said, Do not be dismayed, because you also have chosen to act selflessly. You may choose. James thought, Choose? What may I choose? The light answered, You may stay here with your family and your ancestors, or you may return to your world, but you will have to decide upon a form. James inquired, Decide upon a form? The light answered, Your old body was obliterated. You must choose another. The light showed James a plethora of forms to choose from human to animal to plant. In an instant, James chose and was sent back to the world, to his incarnation of choice. Back on Tarathar. Later that night, Mrs. Tafferty gave birth to a little boy. Dr. Katz assisted with the birthing. The doctor had determined Emma to be healthy, but insisted she be kept overnight for observation, just to be sure. For lack of room and resources, the new boy, named Jonathan by his father, would be placed into the same makeshift crib as Emma. All that night, the two infants lay side by side, hand in hand, as the two souls had been reunited, given a new chance at life. Even though they had lost all memory, Their bond was instantaneous. Connor and Sin had stayed up all night talking. They sat together on a small hill outside of the camp, watching for the rising sun. As the light started to crest above the horizon, a most peculiar thing started to happen. Firstly, the color of the sky on Taratha was typically pink or light blue, according during the sunrise, but that did not occur. Instead, the horizon started to become yellow. In the emerging light, they could see a series of shadows in the distance. As the white sun slowly rose, the full picture started to come into view. Off in the great distance, thousands of winged beings had gathered into an area around some kind of construct. They and the construct appeared only as shadow against a sky that was turning into a brilliant gold. The shadows of the winged humanoids were bowing down over and over, as though in worship. Further into the horizon, many thousands of winged beings appeared in the sky. All at once, they started to sing in the most beautiful harmony of tones. The beautiful music drew people out of their tents and shelters. People awoke gently from their slumber and followed the heavenly sound. Each heard the music in their own way of understanding it. Each heard their own version of the supernatural song as the most beautiful thing they could imagine. No two people heard the same thing, but if the spirit of the song could be put into words, it might have gone something like this. Rest, my child, for today's work is done, but it's still eternity, and our journey's barely begun. Embrace now one who is dear. Live now in love, with no room for fear. Those who love you have freely given their lives. If we can be as they were, then we all shall rise. Worry not for tomorrow, for the universe is love, and God is within you, under, inside, and above. Remember these 3 days, all those who are gone, and learn to love each other under the light of a golden dawn. As the legions of celestial beings sang, and the thousands gathered round, a grand image started to come into view. In the midst of all the rejoicers, a gigantic monument started to materialize. 1,200 feet high and 490 feet wide, a shadowy form started to take the shape of a golden female figure attached to a crucifix of brazen wood, the strongest tree which was native to that world. The golden figure was crucified upon it. Many people gasped, oohed and awed at this marvelous event, while others watched on in silent awe. As the sun rose above the horizon, the sky became a brilliant gold. The white light of the sun reflected off the golden surface of the girl on the cross, creating a dazzling and nearly blinding reflection. Singing a final chorus, the winged beings vanished from view as the monument materialized to its full glory, a symbol of love and sacrifice. The golden figure upon the crucifix took the shape of Emily, wearing her kimono. There was no need for a stone or plaque with words. Everyone knew what it meant, and the story would be told for many thousands of years. Through the blood of the Son of God, the earth was spared judgment. Through the blood of the Daughter of God, the people of earth are given a new opportunity to live and love in the present. With the duality of sacrifice complete, in both the masculine and feminine forms, no soul could ever suffer any form of hell, save for the self-made ones they create in their seemingly mortal lives. The sky of every world shined gold for 3 days, without any interruption of night or a sign at all. The celestial muses delivered the story to artists. Prophets told of it. Dreamers had visions of it. Its echo could be found in every love, every war, every miracle, and every tragedy. There would still be suffering in the material world, but the gates of hell were shut up for all eternity, never again to be opened. And so the prophets spake, and the singers sang, bringing the golden gospel to all, that at long last hell and condemnation were dead in the heart of God, who wished to see no more suffering. But man has free will, and so would keep some measure of suffering alive for all time. Yeshua and Emily had died to give all of man that measure of freedom, to choose love or judgment, and now the decision rested with the freed spirit of man. Stanley Weiser spent a week in a holding cell for assault and was released. He arrived back at his family tent late at night. Waltzing straight into the tent, he called out, "Ellen, have you seen my phone?" Ellen emerged from the dividing privacy wall at the back of the tent, holding up the phone. The phone displayed a communications between Stanley and the Red Union. The communications implied that Stanley was, in fact, not Emily's father, and that he had implanted both an egg and a sperm made from the same cells, which had not been his. The communication also implied that Stanley had willingly handed over both Ellen and Emily to the mercies of the Red Union research team to be experimented on and have her organs harvested, all for a hefty sum of money. It also showed that Stanley had consented to having a daughter taken and his wife killed. Stanley had sold out his own family and perpetuated that lie that led to the deaths of his own family members. The text also indicated that he had been selling Maddox secrets to the same Red Union scientist that extracted Emily's organs, killing her in the process. Ellen held up the phone for Stanley to see and tossed it at his feet. Stanley stammered, saying, I can explain. It's not what it seems. Ellen, looking enraged with tears in her eyes, shouted out, "Save it!" Ellen pulled a 6-shot revolver out of the front of her pants and pointed it at Stanley. Stanley continued to selfishly defend his actions, saying, "You don't understand. They controlled everything. I didn't have a—" Ellen shouted, "Shut the fuck up, you rotten piece of shit." Stanley remained silent as Ellen continued. Ellen stopped shouting and instead started to talk in a low and menacing tone, as though something were in her throat. "And to think, I thought I was with a principled and honorable man, but you fucked us all. And worst of all, you got my little girl killed. You're not even her father. The whole fertilization surgery was a total lie. It was all a total lie." Stanley stuttered some more, calling out, "Please, let me explain. I can do better. Please, forgive me." Ellen chuckled in disgust at the obscene request for forgiveness. She raised the gun up and pulled the hammer back, taking aim at the center of Stanley's body. Stanley started to beg again, "Please, Ellen, listen to—" Stanley was unable to finish the sentence as Ellen unloaded a shot from the gun into the center of his chest, knocking him to his back. Badly injured but still alive, Stanley looked up to see Ellen looking down at him. Ellen shook her head with disgust, saying, "Jesus might forgive you. I won't." Ellen then unloaded 3 more shots into Stanley's body, mortally wounding him. Before he could die of those injuries, Ellen put the last 2 shots into his head, killing him instantly. Several passers-by saw the flashes of light and the shadows of Ellen pumping brass into Stanley's body in the early evening. Security forces arrived and arrested Ellen. Before she could stand before a judge, she managed to smuggle in a length of wire through a friend and hung herself in the holding cell. After that, things finally settled down for the people of the desert as they worked on building a new world. Over time, the small camp would form into a nation named Berenia, after the great barren desert in which it was discovered. The castle would become the capital building as their society spread out. The people of that nation would form a constitutional monarchy based on the tenets of the Matic Core, with Amber Rouge installed as the first queen. Further monarchs would be chosen through a democratic system of voting, but all would be bound to the constitutional tenets of the nation's founding. They would become a mighty nation of humans, befriending and making enemies with many peoples, but never forgetting their roots, and keeping the majority of their own unity. For the central ethic of this place was to live and let live, and for many generations they would only engage in war when they had no other choice. In the spirit world, Malachi Mura Shull, having been killed by the Matic vessel striking the Tower of Madness at light speed, awoke to find himself in the spirit world. He came to in a place of darkness, moving closer and closer to a magnificent light, the same light that had greeted James and greeted Malachi and Michael. Why did I say Malachi? Anyways. Oh, Malachi Murashkal received a life review from his own perspective and from the perspective of everyone he had ever interacted with. He felt no guilt or shame. He was proud of all of it. He even felt as though he as those as though those who he had hurt had deserved it. He beamed with joy upon seeing the works he had done. The light spoke to his mind, saying, Abaddon, the destroyer, you surrendered your nirvana for power. You cannot enter paradise. You may only reincarnate. Abaddon thought to himself, Ha! Good to see you too, father. I'm glad to see you, even if you ain't glad to see me. Ah, well, paradise is overrated. I seek conflict. The light spoke to its son, Abaddon. You will have it, for there is another. Abaddon questioned the light. Another? Another what? The light spoke. There is another who surrendered nirvana. She did so for the ability to restore lives. She will undo all the damage you cause. Abaddon answered, Oh, good. I do so love a challenge. If this new one fixes everything, I can destroy for eternity. The light spoke. Challenge you shall have. She is both benevolent and powerful. She will make you a fine adversary. Abaddon spoke. Yes, there is much work to do. The light spoke. Your recent body was destroyed. You must choose a new form. Instantly Abaddon was able to see all possible incarnations. Having seen them all, he quickly decided upon a form to inhabit. Abaddon thought to himself, There, on the second moon, orbiting around the planet, a malevolent form is about to take shape. An ancient evil power has been stirred up by recent events. It will become a most dreaded thing, capable of much murder and mayhem. The light spoke. You would inhabit the avatar of vampirism to become Vladimiros? You would be a champion of darkness, power, control, terror, and death. Abaddon thought, Yes, give me that. The light responded, I gave you free will to do with as you please, but if you do this, your karma will catch you. The people will rebel. After causing much destruction, you will be defeated and then imprisoned for all eternity. Is that what you desire? Abaddon cackled. One more great go-round as the ultimate wielder of power? How could I turn it down? And I may even surprise you. I may in fact find a way to defeat you. Will you give me what I want, or hold me hostage here? The light spoke. Go. Abaddon went back to the material world to incarnate as an ancient evil, a vampiric demigod sealed away many generations ago. He did it all for one last season of power, one last chance to win his war. He did this, intent on taking revenge on all of humanity for denying him his right to rule by might. On Tuathar's pink moon, a great evil power started to stir. The end.